The type, quantity, and character of the connections that we're advocating for will be determined by the communities that surround the freeway. All the drawings you see on the board and in the lobby were done by volunteers and are merely examples of what could be. Nothing has been decided, no plans have been created, no goals written, nor have any alternatives of any kind been discussed. What has been completed is a feasibility study to prove that a freeway lid covering I-5 between Denny Way and Madison Street is financially and technically feasible. And the first thing we'll be spending money on, because these events are funded by our group and not by the grant, is to focus on building partnerships with the communities divided by the freeway.
Mentioned briefly the idea of the Seattle Commons. I mean, looking backwards many years ago, you know, you tell the story of the Commons and people say, how did that not happen? Putting rapid transit in Seattle, funded by the federal government to the point of about 90%. How did that not happen? It didn't happen because those were great ideas that somehow the message didn't get out. Somehow we didn't touch the people who were going to have a big hand in the decision making to be able to say, yes, I really think that's a great idea. I'm willing to do it because it solves one of my problems. It addresses one of my issues. So, you know, with that, Marshall, I'm going to maybe ask you if you wouldn't mind giving us kind of a high level summary of just how that all came together. Marshall was there at the beginning and helped form not only the structure within the city to do it, but led the negotiations.
Mayor Nichols really had so much passion about the history of the city and helped to galvanize the city council, the city, and ultimately the county and the state to agree on a plan for removing the viaduct. It gave us a clear path to reclaim that 20 acres of public space for public life, for city life, for, you know, all the great things that we're imagining also for Lit I-5. And something very important happened that often does not happen with public projects. The city decided, you know what, this is bigger than us. If we were to try to go and do this, we will just build a capital project. We'll build a street. There could be some nice park pieces. That's interesting. But we need to bring in a whole bunch of partners. There's a bunch of people who are already out there doing great work in the community. And this committee was created, which basically brought all these different voices from neighborhood, from stakeholder organizations, from, you know, groups like Allied Arts were represented, the Seattle Parks Foundation, all of our communities on the waterfront, Chinatown International District, Pioneer Square, Pike Place Market. And basically, before we had a proposal, much like what John said earlier, there was no plan yet. There were a lot of ideas. We welcomed a whole group of people in to be part of the vision and to take ownership of it. The city actually said, you know what? You know, sometimes cities do commissions or committees. They already know what they want. This was not that. This was very much like, we're going to hand you all authority to make sure there are people to drive this forward. That created a willingness to take a political risk to put a bunch of authority with this committee. And the people who were the leaders of that group and invested in that created the Friends of Waterfront Park and helped to advocate for all the public funding and ultimately the completion of the park.
How do we build that support, and what are some of your thoughts about building that same kind of compelling rationale that Marcia was just talking about?
What is the community saying that they could envision that you could knit together a powerful story and narrative about why this project could be so impactful and important to Seattle and how it can make a difference for them in their lives? We're going to need some 112,000 housing units in Seattle. We need 80,000 units of affordable housing that you could have a project like this that could renew and develop these acreages, finding the stories that people want to tell about how they see the future of Seattle developing, and then also connecting it back to Seattle's past of doing big things that have big impact. And I think also the idea of this generational impact, that this would be a project that would generationally transform Seattle.
And so I'm curious, and some of your thoughts about how do we engage the CID in a way that's meaningful, in a way where they can really trust that there's a genuine outreach and there's a genuine interest in trying to do something that improves the situation here.
Yeah, I think the challenge for this LID I-5 project will be to demonstrate how the project can benefit the community members of the CID. You know, how do you connect the rest of the CID to the LID? Because you're thinking about elevation changes, like if you've ever tried to walk up to Japantown up 7th or 6th, it's quite, yeah, you're huffing and puffing. And so with our residents who are largely elderly, or we have young families here, thinking about how do we make this place accessible for all and safe for all is something I think about. We have the least amount of green and public space per capita, and the parks that we do have are pretty hardscape. And so I think that could be a potential opportunity. It's hard for this community to think about large projects being beneficial to the city because it feels like the large projects that have been beneficial to Seattle has not been beneficial to the CID. The community was left out of the process, not included from the beginning, and it's felt like these projects were kind of placed here, and then the community had to then scramble as a reaction instead of coming to the table very early on.
Have we defined the solution before we've really understood the problem? You know, have we closed the door on some maybe broader thinking that will really build a bigger coalition for what this project can be?
It's uniquely true in that CID has already thought in huge depth about what needs to happen in this community. Come forward with something that shows actual appreciation and understanding of that as a foundation. That probably sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how often that gets overlooked in the enthusiasm to just engage with people.
I think what Ann was saying is so critical is the idea, it's felt like, sounds like in the past that it was something, this was something done to the community. Mm-hmm. and imposed on instead of something, this is something done with community for the community. And so this, even thinking about how you change the operating principles and starting from the very beginning.
In the past 2 decades, the CID has done countless studies. We've looked at every street, every block, every building, and talked about mobility and connectivity and green spaces and affordable housing. And so it's really refreshing to be able to work with entities that have already read those studies and come to the table, summarizing what it's not really one project that the community feels like, oh, it was because of that then we were worse off. It's really these smaller projects that have kind of built up this level of distrust between the community and local government because promises were not kept or things were not communicated. And so even if your project is well-intentioned, you are coming into a community that has never really reaped the benefits of any of these major public works. And so I think coming in with that humility as well, knowing that folks might be a little bit skeptical when you have a community forum. We're very much on the same page in terms of the goals of LID I-5.
Cost and maintenance is probably going to drive a lot of the decisions absent any other input for I-5. So I'm curious, how do we find some opportunity or leverage to really engage in a meaningful way with WashDOT, which is going to be critical to this project, and in a way that says, let's let them buy into a bigger vision of what they can be and what they can do. This is going to be a partnership with them.
WashDOT has its constituency. It has to listen to people. It has to listen to what the governor is thinking. It also needs funding from the legislature. So it's like, okay, who are the lawmakers that are influencing WashDOT, and where are those lawmakers represented, and what do they want to see? At the state level, at the city level, it's very, very accessible to actually engage with the lawmakers, to engage with their staff, because they are so tied to the community, and they want to know what's happening in the community. So if they see, and I think like a project like this, like, oh, all of a sudden you have the international district is very interested in LID I-5 and some other partners that aren't necessarily seen as partners together moving something, that becomes very interesting to them. So that's like, well, what's going on here? Really building that support at the local level. WashDOT has to answer, especially to the state lawmakers, because they're the ones funding their budget.
It's so valuable that WashDOT has already identified the need to replace I-5. And I'm sure some others remember too, I believe this was last year, maybe 2 years ago, there was a lot of coverage of the seismic risk associated with losing I-5, emergency response in a major earthquake. WashDOT's responding to that. And actually, leading I-5, you all have done a great job of picking up on that as part of the resilience message with this, that really we do the work that, Ann, you were talking about to get the community's needs and interests reflected in the DNA of the vision of the project, and get a coalition to come together, also centering WashDOT's needs right in the middle of it. They have to work with, to your point, every elected leader of every one of these districts. They have to work with the city of Seattle. They have to work with the community directly. We're all locked arms and ready to work with you, WashDOT, to make this succeed. That's very appealing. I mean, as someone who's built large projects in Seattle, having a unified partner who you can work with to kind of cut a path through all that sort of political turbulence, if you will, is extremely appealing. And the WashDOT leadership, I think it's fair to say, they've been very willing to collaborate on this, and they've seen the need for that kind of a partnership. So it's a great time to plan. It's a great time to build the coalitions. It's a great time to get that whole strategy cooked.
And I do apologize for suggesting maybe we should change the name to Lit I-5, but it really goes to the question. I think if somebody asked me to redesign an egg carton, the first thing I'm going to think about is a carton, and I'm going to be kind of focused on what is that carton going to be made of, what is it going to look like, how's it going to be different. If the problem were presented to me in a way that said, how do I transport 12 really delicate eggs from the store to my home safely, then maybe I'll think something different than a carton. What are the issues that are impacted by the fact that I-5 cuts through these neighborhoods? And we won't be able to solve them all necessarily, but if we understand them, like Marshall is saying, and we collect them, then maybe we can begin to build coalitions around people who are interested in some of those issues, so that we can begin to then define what the real purpose of this project is. So were the CID to be involved, how do we really touch and get in touch with that diversity that exists here in a way that we can really believe it represents the community as a whole?
So you have a largely immigrant and refugee population that don't speak English at home, that are living below the poverty line. I guess your question was, is there like a mechanism in place for community engagement? And my answer is no. It's messy, it's multifaceted and layered, and you have to change your strategy based on who you're trying to reach. We have things translated with interpreters way ahead of time. My neighborhood has over 350 small businesses, so one of the densest small business districts in the city. And again, I think it's hard to sell an idea like this that won't happen 15, 20 years down the line when the business owner is worried about their day-to-day operations. So as a way to form community, family associations were formed with people who were coming from the same area. Family associations have been able to buy property together in the ID and build a lot of political power that way. And so we have the food bank here, language learning schools, International Community Health Services, Wing Luke Museum. Make it fun. It doesn't have to be like a charrette. I know we all love charrettes, but you can only look at a map for so long and put stickies on things for so long.
Personal observation is my fellow immigrants from East Asian are typically very quiet in all kind of public engagement event. We don't think public engagement will make a difference. And I think for the waterfront project and also the Seattle Center project, the area, those are all great public space. But to some extent, it's more for tourists instead of local Seattle. So we're proud, we have those kind of public amenities. Everyone wants to have a look and want to visit. Lead I-5 project, the location is kind of in the center of the city, rather than waterfront is a little bit isolated personally for me. Lead I-5 could be a good one for the locals to engage more instead of just purely being a Pike Place is now originally for the locals, right? But now more for tourists. They're welcome, but
And I think I'd like to believe that if we build something cool for the people who actually use it and live here, then visitors will come. It shouldn't be the other way around.
There is an entity in Seattle already that could be an instrument to help build in more affordability, to help be a buffer against the gentrification pressures that we're seeing on such a large public scale project.
The Lit I-5 project in the CID may be more about reclaiming land for the community by tunneling the freeway and getting it underneath so that you can imagine the things the neighborhood needs to have in terms of affordable housing. That's kind of the beauty of what you can do with having so many different communities that are part of this idea, is it can express itself in really different ways in different places.